And we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. It is 9 minutes past 8. And good morning, Dr. John.
Good morning, Mick. How are you?
Good. It's good to have you here this morning. I know the internet is a little slow this morning, so us being able to see each other isn't working so well, but that's all right. We can hear you just fine.
Yeah, as you said, Mick, you had Dr. John in the studio, but you don't really.
No.
We need to let people know that I'm on the phone and we're on the on Messenger as well. So we're using all the wonders of modern technology to make it work.
Yes. Now, Dr. John, it's great to have you back in here again. Of course, we every week either talk about stuff that's been in the news over the last week, or we answer people's questions. That's questions that people send through to our text line 0401 949 949. And I've got to say thank you to all the people that have been sending in questions, because it really helps. I mean, if you have a question, chances are somebody else has the same question. And so it is so important for you to send those questions through. And Dr. John, what is on the agenda for this week?
Well, the question we got, or one of the questions we got last week about sharks.
Yes.
And you sent it through to me. A listener sent you a link on that text line about some investigations that had been done on a big fish called a Greenland shark.
Yes, they say it was a fossil revealing a giant underwater killing machine that once called Outback Australia home.
Yeah. What was that one?
Was that the same one?
Yeah, no, that wasn't the one that I was thinking of. I was thinking of the one that you got about the Greenland sharks.
All right.
And I thought sharks was probably a bit topical for us. So, I mean, we've had quite a few shark attacks around Australia this year.
Yes.
And, people are fairly interested in sharks. But the Greenland shark is a little bit different. And this one grows to well over 6 metres. It's a very, very, very big fish. So it's bigger than a great white, but it's obviously not as aggressive as a great white. And the listener sent in a link to an article about a scientific study on those sharks. Do you remember that one?
Ah, yes, that was the shark that didn't have any teeth because it was so old.
No, I think it did have teeth, but it doesn't use them very much. But look, they had been estimating the ages of the sharks. It's a particular breed of shark that happens up in the Arctic. And the way they estimate the age of the shark is by sampling a protein in the shark's eye. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And apparently they've been looking at these sharks for a while, and a lot of them have been tagged. And the article had a picture accompanying it of a diver swimming with one of these Greenland sharks. And I thought that was very interesting. I thought, how on earth do they go and sample a protein in the shark's eye? And I had visions of the diver going up with a needle and sticking it in the shark's eye as it swam along. And I thought that wasn't a very wise thing to be doing. But and it seemed like a pretty cruel way to investigate if they've had to drill into the eye of a live shark. But look, I thought I'd investigate a bit further. And I found another article on the same topic, apart from the one that the listener had sent in to us. And it mentioned that they'd had, a lot of those sharks had inadvertently been trapped in fishermen's nets. And, of course, that's how the sharks had died. And so that's where they were sampling the eye proteins from, which gave me a bit of reassurance. I didn't really like the sound of the potential cruelty, but it doesn't appear as though it was a cruel investigation at all.
Mm-hmm. And it is the same one I saw. I saw a picture of one that they said was, hundreds and hundreds of years old, and the picture showed him without any teeth.
Right. Well, it may not have a lot of teeth because it apparently swims very slowly, and they estimated it had a top speed of only about 3 k's an hour, which is barely more than a crawl. You know, I think if you were strolling along at 3 k's an hour, that's a pretty quiet sort of a walk.
Yep.
And so the divers wouldn't have any problem keeping up with this shark.
Yes, well, I feel happy about that because I'll be able to tell people that I can outswim a shark.
Yeah, well, you'd probably be able to outswim this one. And, of course, they were investigating, too, what the diet of these sharks might be, because apparently they found some parts of seals in the sharks' stomachs. Now, they thought they must have been scavengers because a shark cruising along at 3 k's an hour probably wouldn't be able to catch too many seals.
No, but he might get some seals off the bottom if they had a heart attack.
Yeah, well, that's right. No, but apparently they can dive very deep, these sharks too, down to about 2,000 metres. So who knows what they really dine on? But they definitely wouldn't be able to catch a seal.
You are on 94.9. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International, and we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. He's talking to us this morning a bit about sharks, and a shark that's found up in the Northern Hemisphere that swims very, very slowly. It's very, very big. It's huge, in fact, and apparently it lives to super, super, super old age. Is that really possible, Dr. John? And how do they tell that from taking something out of its eye?
Well, it's interesting, Mick. It was a great article, actually, and they're examining a protein that occurs in the shark's eye. And they apparently have been able to sample this from some dead sharks rather than poking needles into the eye of a live shark. But what they believe from an examination of this eye protein, and they've been carbon dating the eye proteins, they believe that these sharks are very long-lived. They live for over 400 years. And it's very interesting that what we've often said on this program, that carbon dating can only provide an age estimate, they actually agreed with that in the article. I said, they can't give it an accurate date. It'll only give an estimated date. And we would agree wholeheartedly with that because the estimates are possibly not too far wide of the mark for the last few hundred or maybe even 1,000 years, but they're very unreliable the further you go back in time. But anyway, they reckoned that some of these sharks were about 400 or 500 years old. And one of the reasons for the inaccuracy of the ages that they were getting, and they mentioned this in the study, that the eye proteins are apparently formed before the sharks are born. And I can remember from my days in doing anatomy that sharks actually are born live. Most fish shed their eggs into the sea, but the sharks that we examined, they were actually born alive. And the eye proteins apparently get formed before the sharks are born. And they found with the young sharks, that is the ones under about 50 years old, that there was a whole lot of radiocarbon in the eye proteins. And they attributed that to the atmospheric nuclear testing that took place in the 1960s, because they figured that would have produced a lot more carbon-14. So that would throw the age estimates out. And we've spoken about that many times on this program as being one of the problems that you have with carbon dating anyway. Because the guy who invented the technique, Willard Libby, that was back in the 1950s. And, it was a great suggestion that he made that you might be able to estimate ages from radioactive carbon. But, of course, that was in the 1950s. And as we would all remember, Hiroshima and Nagasaki occurred in 1945, and they were very, very dirty bombs. But his idea was great, and he got a Nobel Prize for it. But it really is very, very difficult to use the technique to get an accurate age, because you can't go back into the past and measure the atmospheric carbon-14 at the time the animal or tree or whatever it is that they're looking at was alive. You can only measure the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere now. And as these researchers with the sharks noted, it's obviously higher in the last 50 years than it was before that, and they attributed that to the nuclear testing. And I think they're probably right. And we would agree that that's the most likely reason why the ages of the proteins in the young sharks have such a lot of carbon-14 in them. But from what they could estimate, they decided that the other sharks might live up to 400 or 500 years old. And if there's one thing that you can learn from that study, they really are agreeing that carbon-14 dating has got a lot of problems.
Dr. John, with the sharks, if their ages can be sort of blown out because of this, testing of atomic sort of bombs in the past, why can't that throw all carbon dating out around the planet? Well,
it does, and that's one of the points that we've often made at Creation Ministries, because we can only measure the amount in the atmosphere now. We have to make an assumption that it might have been the same back 1,000, 2,000 years ago. And, of course, we can't make that assumption because we know that the amount of radioactivity in the air would have produced a lot more carbon-14. Anyway, we'll talk a bit more about radioactive carbon dating when we come back.
We have Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International, who's been talking to us this morning a bit about sharks and a bit about carbon dating and a bit about how, the scientific community out there are now saying, hey, we know carbon dating isn't particularly accurate. The interesting thing is, Dr. John, carbon dating is regarded as one of the most accurate ways of dating things when it comes to long times.
Yeah, well, look, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the example we were talking about this morning was those Greenland sharks, and they have realised that the young sharks have got a lot more carbon-14 in their eye proteins because of the nuclear testing that took place back in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. And it's a useful article that leads us into some of the reasons why carbon-14 dating is inaccurate. Yes. And carbon-14 is not a naturally occurring form of carbon. Normal carbon is carbon-12. And carbon-14 gets formed from nitrogen-14 because the nitrogen atom gets impacted by radiation, and one of the protons in the nitrogen atom gets converted into a neutron, and then it behaves like carbon, and it's called carbon-14. Mm. And as the researchers in this article rightly said, because of all the radiation since the nuclear testing, there's a lot more carbon-14 in the atmosphere. So that would act, and because we can only measure the amount now, we can't go back into the past and measure what it was then we know that it's greater now, and that would throw the estimates out. It would reduce them quite considerably. But there's another reason why they should be reduced considerably as well. And that's because of the Earth's magnetic field. And we've talked about that on the program before too. The Earth's magnetic field has been measured for the last couple of 100 years. And it's known that it's reduced by about 15% over that time. Now, what the Earth's magnetic field does is it deflects cosmic radiation away from the Earth. So with a weaker magnetic field, we get more cosmic radiation. Therefore, we would get more carbon-14 formed. So there's those two factors, nuclear testing and a weaker magnetic field. That means the formation of carbon-14 is going to be a lot more now than it was back in the past. And that's why you have to reduce the estimates that we get of ages of very ancient things. And really, we don't know how much they've got to be reduced by. And the further you go back into the past, the likelihood is that the reduction has to be further. So to sort of explain what it is, the way ages are estimated, it's based on the half-life of carbon-14, because when it's formed, it is unstable and it decays back to nitrogen-14, and it does that over a specific rate called a half-life. And the half-life of radioactive carbon is believed to be 5,730 years. I mean, that's what we believe it to be now. We don't know what it was back in the past. We have to assume that it was the same. And what a half-life really means is that an initial quantity gets reduced to half over this particular period of time, and then over the same period of time again to a quarter, and then an eighth and a 16th and so on. It's an exponential decay. And that means because our instruments can only measure a certain amount of radioactive carbon, that puts an upper limit of dates obtained by radioactive carbon of about 60,000 years, even if those ages actually existed, and we actually don't believe they do. But we'll continue talking about that a bit when we come back, Mick.
And we have Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International, and he answers your questions every week by basically you send them into our text line. That is 0401 949 949. So come on, send us some questions for maybe this week, maybe next week. We'd love to hear whatever you have to ask, and Dr. John would love to have a go at answering it for you. That number again, 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, we've been talking this morning about sharks and radiocarbon dating that they've been using on their eyes, and also how not or inaccurate carbon dating is. And interestingly, Dr. John, we've had you on this program for a few years now, and you've talked about carbon dating a few times and how it's not that accurate. Well, interestingly, there's a comment made in Science Daily. They've actually got a thing on carbon dating, and they say radiocarbon dating is a key tool archaeologists use to determine the age of plants and objects made with an organic material. But new research shows that commonly accepted radiocarbon dating standards can miss the mark, calling into question historical timelines.
Yes, well, that's what we've always said, isn't it, Mick? That when they come up with these huge numbers of multiple thousands of years, they're acknowledging that that may well be wide of the mark. And we've explained many times why we believe it is. And, I mean, people assume when they read a date that perhaps there's a scientific instrument that you can put on something to estimate its age. But, of course, there isn't. There's no scientific instrument that will tell you the age of anything. All the ages that you see bandied around are derived from indirect measurements, and with all of the measurements, it doesn't matter how scientific they sound, they all have to make certain assumptions for them to be valid. And if any of the assumptions are wrong, then the dates are totally invalid and cannot be trusted at all. And we've just explained this morning two of the reasons why carbon dating is invalid, because we can only measure the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere now. We don't know what it was when the animal or tree was alive. And we've just explained that there's at least two reasons why it's invalid. One of them is the amount of radioactivity in the air these days from nuclear testing, and also the fact that the Earth's magnetic field has been declining, allowing more cosmic radiation in and increasing the amount of carbon-14 formed. So both of those things increase the amount of carbon-14 formed, which means you have to reduce the dates that have been given historically, and we really have no idea by how much. So in simple terms, that's why we cannot really trust the dates given by carbon dating. And in actual fact, out in the field, archaeologists usually will only accept a carbon date if it accords with what they already believe. So, they actually go by history and then use the carbon-14 dating to confirm that. And sometimes it agrees and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Dr. John, another story that's been in the media over the last week, which I found quite interesting. It was wild in the media. In fact, it was on all sorts of different news channels, and they were saying that the moon's wobble is going to exacerbate climate change and flooding effects around the world. The moon's wobble? It sounds a little interesting to me.
Yeah, I read that article too, Mick. It was a beauty, and NASA apparently announced that there is such a thing. It's called the moon's nodal cycle, and it's commonly known as a moon wobble. And it's been known about for about 300 years, and it's a cycle that recurs every 18.6 years. And it seems that the moon's orbit changes periodically. Sometimes it's tilted up a bit and sometimes tilted down a bit, and that alters the alignment of the moon with the sun. Now, both the sun and the moon contribute to the Earth's tides, but the moon is more important because it's closer to the Earth, and the moon's effect on tides is greater than the sun's, but when you combine it, you get quite a massive increase when the sun and the moon are fully aligned. And anyway, NASA's announced that we're about to come into the strongest part of that alignment. And so they're predicting that tides are going to be a bit higher over the next up to 10 years or so. And of course they paid the usual homage to climate change, saying how because the water levels have risen with these massive tides, we're going to have much more massive flooding. And of course, I think the present floods in Europe have been blamed on climate change. I mean, climate change is responsible for everything. If you believe everything you read in the news, it's responsible for bushfires, it's responsible for flooding, it's responsible for Great Barrier Reef changes and shark attacks. It doesn't matter what it is, climate change is going to get the blame. That is man-made climate change. And NASA, of course, jumped on the bandwagon, and the various people who commented on these articles jumped on the same bandwagon, even saying that, we're going to get all these massive tides, but don't even blame the moon wobble, it's climate change.
Yeah, although the moon wobble's been known about for hundreds of years, and it's been confirmed recently with scientific instruments. It's not something we can actually see, though, that wobble, is it?
Sorry? It's not what?
We can't actually see the moon wobbling.
No.
Right.
I suppose, depending on what you've been consuming, you might see it wobbling, but no, just by looking at the moon, no, you don't see it wobble.
Okay, but
look, why do we talk about this, Mick? And we need to summarise it by saying that Christians shouldn't be fazed by all of these dates and these other things that are bandied about, because the Bible's history really is the truth. And when we look at the Bible's account of history, we know that the earth is only about 6,000 years old. We see confirmation of that right throughout the true scientific evidence that is around the place. And of course, that means that we can trust the story about Jesus' resurrection as well. And so really that's what we're on about at Creation Ministries. We're not trying to have arguments with scientists. We're just trying to show that the Bible is true and it's absolutely reliable.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. John. Another awesome week, and I guess you can't go anywhere, so you're going to be here next week.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I won't be going anywhere, Mick. I'll be around, and let's have some more questions come into our text line.
Absolutely. Send those through. Just send an SMS to 0401 949 949. That's 0401 949 949. Thank you, Dr. John. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, thanks, Mick. See you next week.